Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel and welcome to this very special video. Recently I got the opportunity to sit down and have a chat with Patrick van Straaten, a man who needs no introduction in the realm of YouTube football. Patrick was extremely gracious enough to give me a few hours of his time to just sit and have a chat. Of course the main topic of conversation was football, but that's not all we discussed. We just had a chat and let the conversation flow where it may. So yeah, it was really fun. And I had a lot of fun doing it, and I'm very grateful to Patrick for giving up his time and to putting up with my general awkwardness throughout the conversation. You can tell I don't do an awful lot of these interviews with people, so apologies on my end for being a bit weird in this interview. But all credit to Patrick. He was very patient and very kind and accommodating, so I'm very grateful for that. So without further ado, because no bugger knows where he is currently, here is my chat with Patrick van Straaten. I hope you enjoy it, and thank you, Patrick, once again for coming on and speaking with me. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel, and welcome to a very special edition of the podcast, which hasn't been done in a good long while due to the reasons of laziness. But today I have a very special guest with me today. Footballing YouTube royalty, I would say. If you've been around the football YouTube space for any length of time, you know exactly who this man is and needs no introduction, but I'll do it anyway. It's Patrick van Straaten. Patrick, how are you?
I'm good. That was actually a very nice introduction, which I'm really unused to. Though I am very used to now sharing podcast space with a kind of original Irishman. So this feels like it's in my wheelhouse at this point.
Fantastic. Admittedly, he does have significantly better hair than I do, but we'll have to work past that for now.
He has better hair than I do as well. I really should have taken that into account before I picked him as a podcast host, but here we go.
Anyway, so yes, there's big things happening in the world of football today. We've chosen a good day to do this because in the last few hours, it's ours. I can't pronounce that word any differently. Leandro Trossard has been he's on his way to your club, which is of course Arsenal. 20 million quid plus add-ons. What's the verdict?
I'm kind of fine with it. Like today I was in a couple of group chats that were going berserk, with I guess Arsenal fans kind of thinking they were going to get one of the most exciting young players in the world. They were really high on the Mudryk possibility, and then there's been talk of Moussa Diaby from Leverkusen, and I think they kind of bought into this idea. But my whole attitude all along has been, you have a project that you overall stay true to, but when there's a chance to get a title, and this isn't a chance like it's the beginning of the season, this is a chance like we're halfway through a season. Manchester City are not in phenomenal form. Everything has gone right for Arsenal. Even with the injuries, they've kind of been able to fade them to some degree. At that point, you make decisions based on maximizing your chances of winning this title, and getting in a 28-year-old proven Premier League talent who can play across the front line is not the worst thing to do at that point. You don't give him a huge contract. You don't give him a long contract. But if he's the thing that tips you over and gets you the title, it'll be worth it. And even if you miss out on the title having got him, that would be better than missing out on the title having not got him. So from that point of view, I'm totally fine with it. It doesn't set my world on fire, but winning the title would set my world on fire. So from that point of view, it's all about kind of actuarial analysis,
Oh yeah, to be honest, when the news came through today, I thought it's absolutely fine. There's nothing, like I say, it didn't set the world on fire. Yeah. It's sort of, from an outsider's perspective, as a Newcastle fan looking in, just like, because I do actually kind of all the people who could win the title this year, I'm like, give it to Arsenal, go on. I don't have to listen to City fans, go on and on. I don't have to listen to Liverpool fans bleat on about how class they are. But that's growing up as in like the 90s and early 2000s, and seeing Arsenal being this huge force, which they still are, to be fair. They're still a massive club. But like you say, they haven't won a title since, you'll know better than I will,
2004. Since
seriously, that long?
Yeah, since the Invincibles.
Bloody hell.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Bloody hell, I didn't think it was that long. Jesus Christ. But no, but like, yeah, as you say, it's a perfectly, depth is kind of the most important thing at this stage of the season as well. And he can
Yeah.
play, like you say, he can play along all across the front three. Because I didn't realize he played so much as a nine for Brighton so far this year, or sort of their equivalency of a nine. I don't know if they,
Yeah.
he can do a job, which is what you need.
Yeah, and he's played wing back as well, I think. I was looking, somebody sent me a thing today that said something like, I think of his Premier League goals, like 19 have been with his right foot and 15 have been with his left foot. And you think, oh, that's kind of interesting. You look at his games against Liverpool, clearly he's able to create separation in the box and get away attempts. He's actually, I do remember us being linked with him years ago before we made the Nicola Pepe deal. So you look at all that stuff and you think, if Arteta wants him at this stage, there's not that much downside. Like, what's the worst that happens? We don't win the title, and in 2 years' time, other fans are taking the piss out of us and saying, well, you wasted 20 million on Trossard. There's no way they'll be doing that. Everyone would have forgotten about him. And if we don't win the title, we won't care. And if we do win the title, we won't care.
Yeah.
So, in a way, our clubs are in a similar position, right? Because I wouldn't say Newcastle. I wouldn't say Newcastle are quite in the title race, but you're certainly in the race for third. And with a fair wind, second could be possible, but I don't think it's likely. But also, there's a really good first team there, a really good plan in place, but it's a little bit thin around the edges, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And even look to where we were this stage last year. Like sure. Chris Wood, for example, we brought in for 20 million for some reason. But he's going out on loan to Forest. He's agreed a loan with Forest at the minute. So whether or not that actually gets confirmed or not. So even in the year, it shows how much sort of the club's moved on. And yeah, I agree with you. Like, I don't see us getting top four at all. I would be happy with,
really?
I'd be very happy with top four, but I think it's just the kind of, yourself as a football fan in general, you tend to kind of go with the more negative opinion. So then anything else is kind of sure. Like a happy surprise. But if we can get any form of European football, I'll be very happy with this year. I figured, and the fact that we've done it, admittedly, we have spent 200 odd million pounds to get to this stage. But the fact that we hadn't spent, as far as I'm concerned, that's 15 years worth of spending done in one window, if you know what I mean.
Sure. Yeah.
You look at other clubs that have spent that over a similar length of time. I figured, that's just us catching up to the rest of the league.
And the signings you've got for that money, I mean, okay, there are some signings in there that I don't love. They're kind of transitional signings, so in the long run, you're not going to have people like, well, I don't know, maybe Dan Burn, but you're not going to have people like Target, like starting for a Champions League team.
God, could you imagine?
That kind of, but then the other signings, you think, if you can get in Bruno and Isak and Botman and even Trippier without Champions League football, I think that's a really scary prospect for the rest of the league. If I were a Spurs or something and I was thinking, oh God, we might actually finish sixth this season, I'd look at Newcastle and say, what have we got? We've got London, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And that's only because, people outside the UK have kind of been indoctrinated into the myth that London is the only city worth living in the UK. But, like that's what they've got because they don't have money and they don't have a sporting project and they don't even... Tottenham's a really well-supported club. They've got a world-class stadium, but Newcastle probably, if you made me pick, Newcastle probably have the best fans in the league. So I don't know, man, like go to Newcastle, be a legend. Don't go to Spurs, or certainly don't go to Chelsea and just become one of another roster of players who will inevitably be called disappointments at some stage.
And the thing as well, going to the likes of a Tottenham, for example, they might not even have Conte in 6 months, a year's time either. So, you're going there to play under him. Maybe that's a drawing factor to go to Tottenham, for example. And then 6 months down the line, he's out the door. Who are you left with then?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the end of the window. Like, I think seeing where we stand going into the back half of the season, like you say, you don't want to get your hopes up too high when it looks like something magical could happen. But that's only because you'll have the piss taken out of you. Whereas actually, as a football fan, it is nice to have that moment of thinking, are we going to do this? Like, after every game that we've won this season, after we beat Spurs the other day, I went into my sitting room and I said to my wife, we might actually win the league. We might actually win the league. And I thought, I'm not going to put that in like our group, in like the Football Daily group chat, except maybe as a joke. But I'll say it to my wife. I say, for a moment, I started to believe that we might win the league, and that's after years of pretty poor football. I mean, don't get me wrong; it's never that bad to be a fan of a club as rich as Arsenal, but after years of quite boring football, and just the club seeming like they have no direction, it's nice to feel like things are maybe moving in the right kind of trajectory at this point.
Oh, believe me, I know exactly how you feel about boring football in a club with absolutely no trajectory whatsoever.
Mm. But has Pardew's 8-year contract actually expired
Oh,
yet?
sweet Christ. What a ridiculous thing that has happened there. Well, literally, genuinely, when I saw that Chelsea had signed Mudryk on an 8-year deal, I thought, Jesus Christ, is this the same lad who
Yeah, it's no
negotiated
Pardew.
Big Alan's contract? Just to stick with the subject of Arsenal, you are obviously an Arsenal fan, but from what I understand, you didn't come from a football family growing up.
No, nobody in my family cares about football
Oh, same
at
here,
all.
same here. So I was just wondering, how did you end up being an Arsenal fan as opposed to anyone? You had your pick of anyone, and you, not to say you've made a bad choice because obviously you haven't.
Well, I don't know. Sometimes I think about, my daughter as she gets older. I think, okay, well, at a certain point, it'd be nice to share this interest with her.
Mm-hmm.
But if I can save her the heartache of being an Arsenal fan, I mean, I would like to do that if possible. I should have just been a fan of Arsenal ladies. That would have made life much easier.
Oh God.
But yeah, I don't know. Like it's. I guess I was never really into football until we moved to Kent when I was about 7. And yeah, my dad's Zimbabwean. Like he's into maybe 2 sports. I'm trying to think. Is there another one? My dad likes. These are the sports my dad likes: skiing. I've never been skiing, but skiing and figure skating. My dad likes those 2 things, which are really funny choices, especially when you're from Zimbabwe. They're
Yeah, I
kind
was
of
going
hard
to
to
say.
do. But my mum as well, like not really bothered. My mum's from the northwest of England, so like more like rugby league country. Though her dad was a toffee, but he died long before I was born. So there was nobody in the family who gave a shit. And so when I was 6 or 7, I started learning guitar. There were
Okay.
2 guys teaching me guitar who were guys from our church at that point. And both of these guys I thought were like the coolest guys in the world. Um, and they were both Gooners. And so I just started watching football, and I think the first time I remember really being aware of a season, was it the 97-98 season where we had a Nelka and we beat Newcastle 2-0 in the FA Cup final with that great goal from him. I remembered that and I was just like, yeah, I guess this is my club now. I noticed that I was caring about Arsenal's results. And it was a phenomenal time to become an Arsenal fan, right? Because over the next few years, we became arguably the most exciting side in the world. I grew up supporting the Dutch national team, and which again was kind of on me. But they had Bergkamp as well, so it just felt like everything came together at the perfect time. And then of course Henri was there, and Henri was just the kind of guy who, whether you support that team or not, you love him. Like he's such an iconic player. He's such a cool player, such an intelligent player. And to have him at Arsenal playing alongside Bergkamp, like when you look back on it now, you think that's so insane. So yeah, I mean, it's a weird path that I took, I guess.
I mean, I really enjoyed Thierry Henry up until around 2010. Then after that, sort of bit of a
Sure.
strained relationship there. Because you said that you're a fan, you support the Dutch national team as well.
Yeah,
Do you get
yeah.
a lot of grief from the sort of English, well, obviously being born in England, living in England? Do you get a lot of grief for that?
Well, I wasn't born in England,
Oh,
so
sorry. Yes, that's right. You were. Yes,
I was born in Spain.
yes, that's right.
So
Sorry.
like when I was growing up, no, like when I was growing up, we kind of, my mum would watch. I remember World Cup '98 really vividly, and when there was international football on, my mum would watch it with me, and there were a few teams we took an interest in. So like Spain, Paraguay, because that's kind of my parents' home away from home. Like my parents met there, they lived there for years. My sister was born there. My parents got married there. And then the Netherlands, because our surname was Dutch and my grandfather was Dutch, and my dad is officially Dutch. Like my dad has a Dutch passport, though he's Zimbabwean. Um, and at just some point in there, I was just like, Spain are annoying. Like Spain pissed me off. I didn't really like the football they played. I was just like, I don't really have a connection to this, except we went to Spain a lot. I would know I was born there, but like I wasn't Spanish in any meaningful way. And arguably I'm not really Dutch in any meaningful way either. But Zimbabwe were not going to go to an international tournament. England, I never felt English. And I still don't to this day. And again, perfect time to be like snapped up by the Dutch because also again the team was really good, but it was really cool. Like there were so many guys in that team, whether it was Bergkamp or Kluivert or Davids or Seedorf, like all these guys who I was just like, each one of these guys is fucking cool. They're one of the best in the world in their position. And that Bergkamp goal at the 1998 World Cup against Argentina, I remember screaming, and I actually remember my parents having a dinner party and they got me downstairs to describe the goal to people because they found it so funny. And looking back on it, I think it was kind of a dick move by my parents because I think they were laughing at me a little bit because I was just like, this sublime touch from Dennis Bergkamp. Like, can you imagine like an 8-year-old saying that? How annoying that is. They were kind of taking the piss, but I look back on it and I'm like, that's the right word for that goal. Like,
it absolutely is.
It's one of the great goals. So yeah, ever since then, once you pick a team, you're with that team. With the Netherlands, now I have I still need to get it sorted, but I have a Dutch passport as well as a British passport. So it's just become, I guess, part of who I am. Even though I don't speak Dutch, I've never lived in the Netherlands. I wasn't born in the Netherlands. It's like plastic Dutchman, plastic Englishman, plastic Zimbabwean, all of them put together.
I'm just thinking it must be nice to have a selection of actually good teams to support on a national level, whereas I have two that I can pick from and they're both shit. So, except, well, the Northern Ireland women's team got to the Euros, so that was pretty good.
Yeah.
But apart from that, we are generally quite dreadful.
I mean, but you at least, do you feel the sense of belonging though when you watch them? Like, how much do you care about your national team's results? Because this is something I've always struggled to get my head around. Because as much as I support the Netherlands, I'm not upset when they lose in the way I am when Arsenal lose.
See, that's the thing. Yeah, I feel exactly the same. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, it's weird to say like I'm proud to be Northern Irish because I've never really thought about it before. But like I do, I'll watch all the Northern Ireland games and the Republic of Ireland games. And I'm just happy enough to support both of them because no one from this island generally does anything much of note. So whenever one of them does well, I'm happy. But if they both, but it's expected that we get shafted every game that we play. So I'm not that upset when either of them lose, to be honest.
Yeah. Okay.
Although like having to cope watching Shane Long up front for about 10 years was quite soul destroying. Yeah. So.
And Kyle Lafferty as well for the Northern Irish.
I have a weird thing where I just absolutely cannot stand Kyle Lafferty. I absolutely hate him. The big lanky idiot. Like it's just, it goes back to that video. Like I think was he playing for Rangers at the time, and he nutted. Like some guy he was like giving it large to some guy who was playing Aberdeen, and the guy went to like pretend to headbutt him, and he went down holding his face, and it's like, you big dickhead, what are you doing? So since then, plus he just seems like a bit of a tragedy as a human being. So
yeah, though I like that he went to Palermo. I still think that's cool.
It's bizarre, isn't it?
I don't know. I think that I don't know why you're not in Palermo right now. I think I assume that as a smallish island, not Ireland, it's not a smallish island, but as a smallish island, I feel like those things should be interchangeable. I think you should be in Palermo.
Well, if he could play for them, I mean, I'll give it a go. Sure, why not? But
yeah,
I mean, like,
how hard could it be?
So you mentioned the '98 World Cup. Now, obviously, that's the first one I can really remember. I was born in October 1990, so '94 couldn't remember anything. '98 is the first one I properly got into. I had the big wall chart and everything. And it's yeah. So I was buzzing for that, and I had the PlayStation game, which is currently framed on my wall because I'm a massive loser.
That's cool.
Because it's my favorite football game. Growing up watching it, obviously we didn't have Sky growing up, so we only saw football very rarely. Well, I only saw it because none of my family are into football either, and it felt like much more of an event. And now, so you can watch bloody 60 games a weekend if you want. Do you feel because this is how I feel about it. It's like I don't feel as kind of it doesn't. What's the word I'm looking for? I don't feel as invested in football. Like I still love football, but but it just feels kind of different, if you know what I mean. Like it doesn't feel like a special occasion to watch it. Because I remember
Yeah,
like to watch it on Champions League nights felt really special as a kid because it's the only time I
yeah,
ever watched football. So
yeah, on ITV.
yeah, with Clive Tilsley going mental about Van Nistelrooy scoring from 3 yards. But obviously, you're working in the football space now. So do you feel like do you feel overwhelmed with the amount of football, or do you just feel like it's just part of the modern world, I guess?
I mean, yeah, like the first couple of years that I did this job, it was actually a pretty good tonic for, I'd say, the overinvestment that I had that I put into football over the years before that. There was, when I first met my now wife, she said I never knew that people experienced sports this way, where she was like, you are in a bad mood for the weekend, like after your team lose, it genuinely affects your life. I don't understand this. I've never experienced this before. And I think that probably was, too far. But also it did feel a bit sad that once it became a job, I started being a little bit less invested. And I mean, obviously that coincided as well with a period of Arsenal getting worse, then changing manager, which really broke a connection that had been there for the entire duration of my life as an Arsenal supporter at that point. So yeah, I do think that it being kind of everywhere for me certainly started to degrade that sense of excitement, because same as you, we didn't have Sky when I was growing up, and often the only football I'd watch in a week, if there was no Champions League, is there were friends of ours in church, and sometimes I'd go to their house after church and we'd like watch a football game, and that was kind of it. And so yeah, now it just feels like it's there all the time. Like as we're recording this, Man City are playing Tottenham tonight. Like it feels like it's incessant. But in a way, I feel like that has been less corrosive to my interest in football, my love of football, than other things going on in the game. Like when you're a kid, you just watch it and you're like, oh, we bought a player, and that's kind of as much as you know. Mm-hmm. Now I feel like we're so aware of all our club's dealings, and we're aware of which players are accused of what, and we're aware of who is shilling for X, repressive regime and all that kind of thing. All that stuff to me is much more miserable, because when you're a kid, you just experience it as the kind of purity of like seeing what the human body is capable of doing. It feels like, when you saw Usain Bolt break the 100-meter record, now it feels like a sort of dirty business to some degree. And so when you get those moments of joy, they're great, and you really want to hold on to them. And then immediately afterwards, you're like, I don't know, here we go again. I don't know if that's a coherent answer, but but certainly, like, I feel my interest fluctuate. Like right now, my interest is pretty high because it looks like we're going to win the league, and actually over the Arteta period, my interest has been pretty high. But because I think partially because we've got these young players who do seem to, I'd say they mean something beyond just being good players for Arsenal Football Club. In the way that Marcus Rashford means something beyond just being a player for Manchester United. I mean, in his case, especially because of what he's done off the pitch. But he also is a local boy who shows what's possible. It's that's kind of how I feel about Bukayo Saka. I feel really proud of him. So that stuff helps as well. But it's this ever changing kind of this wandering level of excitement and misery. I don't know. It's probably, if we don't win the league, maybe I'll just stop being interested again. I'll just say fuck this. I don't want to watch it anymore.
I'll be happy with it. See, I used to hate the League Cup, and now I'm very much for it. It's like
sure.
It's like, yes, let's win the League Cup. Why not?
Why not?
I think the word I was kind of looking for was I've just kind of got numb a bit to the sheer amount of it, And as you said, as a kid, everything's just like, this is amazing. It's bloody Bate Borisov against, I don't know, Dinamo Zagreb. Fucking right, I'll watch that because I have nothing else to watch. to me personally, I just feel like it's kind of lost a bit of that kind of wonderment, if that makes sense, if that's the right word.
Yeah, and I think as well the way it's presented to you, like you see these adverts for games where they're like whipping it up as if it's going to be like this seminal moment in human history. Oh my God, can you believe that this Wednesday Southampton are going to play Nottingham Forest? Like it's going to rock your balls, like you just can't imagine what this will be like to experience this, to be alive at this time. And it's that attitude as well that I find a bit tedious because also when you work in the football space, you're doing that with football news. So there were periods where we were having to take seriously stories about one pundit taking issue with Paul Pogba's hair or whatever, and you think, man, fuck this! Like, come on, we can treat these stories as the ephemera that they are, and similarly, we can treat games as just like part of the business of playing the sport. It's that thing of one death is a tragedy and a million deaths being a statistic. Well, one football game can be exciting, but 500 football games is overkill.
Mm.
So yeah, I think that after a while you just can't. I think about the way that I used to watch football all weekend, and there's a part of me that misses that now that I can barely watch a single football game in the weekend because, like for today, for example, I spent 45 minutes waving ribbons with my daughter. But afterwards, one of those things makes me feel a lot better about my life than the other. So that's kind of how I'm trying to gauge it at this point.
I can't help but think that Mitchell and Webb sketch about the football, nothing
Yeah.
summed up modern football more perfectly for me than that sketch.
Yeah, it's intensely true. Like that's the thing. It's one of those annoying things because you can tell how much they hate football, but they are right.
Oh, they're absolutely right. So you said growing up that your dad was like you obviously weren't a football family, but your dad was into sport in some way. Is there did that love pass on to you in any, or is there any other sports that you're very much into that nobody else really knows about?
Tennis is the one sport my dad really kind of taught me to play. Like we would play that together. And I was pretty good at tennis. Like we had competitions, these are just like at school or whatever. But I remember coming second in one of those, which given that I was quite a fat child, was like a real surprise to everyone. But other than that, like later as well, I was okay at rugby. But tennis is the only one that I'd say I ever really loved the way I loved football. And like, yeah, my dad's a lot posher than my mum and ultimately than me and my sister. So, we never went skiing, did any of that stuff. So I never got into that as well. So maybe I'll develop that taste later on. That would be nice. But I don't know really. Yeah, it was just a family that kind of thought of sport as like a pastime occasionally, and it wasn't really something that you would put your emotions into, and even now when I talk to my parents about it or I talk to my in-laws about it, they kind of can't conceive of this level of investment in a sport. They think of it as like as a little bit silly, and arguably they are right. But you like what you like, don't you? It's exactly the same as my interest in film. Like I think they're kind of the same thing.
Well, you should mention that because I tried to explain the kind of love for football to my dad, and he just has absolutely no time for it at all. We grew up we're a bike family, like a motorbike family. That's what
Oh,
we
cool.
do. So yeah, we grew up doing that. Like apart from that, my family are not. That's the only sport, I guess, that my family are into. Also, like I with like the football, and then obviously being a kid in the '90s, you love like WWF. So I was well into that for a bit. I wanted to be Stone Cold Steve Austin minus the wife battery, preferably.
I didn't know about that, but I
Yeah,
mean, I can't say I'm shocked.
No, it sucks a bit considering.
But again, it was like that. It was like a whether you have cable TV kind of question. I thought, I don't know how you got into it without Skype because I remember going to friends' houses and they'd say, "Oh, do you want to watch WWF?"
Oh.
And I was just like, I don't know what that is. And so I do remember spending hours watching it like in the middle of the night on someone's TV, but I was like, I didn't have a TV in my room and we didn't have Sky. So I knew who The Rock was and The Undertaker was, and all those guys, Triple H, like whatever. but I would see some wrestling every kind of few months, and I'd be like, what has happened now? I
It's like,
A
who's
load of
this Kurt Angle
insanity's
fella?
happened. Yeah, I'd be like, who's this guy? They'd be like, he went to the Olympics. It's like, okay, right, sorry, but I mean, yeah, really the only people who stuck in my mind as time went on from WWF were like The Rock and Trish Stratus for
Oh
different
well,
reasons.
I wonder why.
For different reasons, but in some ways related reasons, I would say.
I was a big Lita fan. She was mine. Um,
Mm. It's crazy how these things end up defining your passions, because like I think the football thing was a bit. I knew that I loved it once I started watching Football Italia
oh
on
man,
Channel 4 on a Sunday afternoon, because those were absolutely diabolical football matches. You know, it would be like Bologna versus Chievo, and it was always 0-0. And your best case scenario would be that they'd throw so many flares on the pitch that you couldn't really see what was going on. And I do remember watching football matches where like there were so many flares, like the ball would just like kind of fly along, and they would let it go for a long time before they abandoned it. But that was the point at which I thought, yeah, I think I'm into this now, because I'm watching two Italian teams with no players I know play out a 0-0 draw that we all know is going to be a 0-0 draw, and I'm fine with it. That's a good use of my weekend. Isn't that tragic?
oh no, well here there was so many of us did it as well. I can't say it was tragic because I was sitting there right there with you. Who was your, just as a matter of interest, who was your team watching Football Italia?
In Football Italia, it was kind of Roma, I
See,
think.
mine was Roma as well.
Yeah, what is it about Roma? Like, I guess it was Totti.
Hmm.
Um,
Vincenzo
but
Montella I had a kind of affiliation for, and I have absolutely no idea why. Because I was a
yeah, I
big
get that.
because I was a big Gabriel Batistuta fan and still am to this
Sure.
day. So, and he obviously
Yeah.
was at Fiorentina, so I was like, I don't understand. Surely I should like, but then he went to Roma, so I was
I
like,
think
surely I should.
Fiorentina was everybody's like at least second Italian side, but for whatever reason, like not the first. I don't think they were quite good enough to be first.
No, I think it's just
I
because they had like a really nice kit. I think that was the reason.
Yeah,
That's generally
it said
higher.
Nintendo on it, and it had
Oh yeah,
Batistuta.
it was
Yeah,
boss as fuck, man.
and Rui Costa as well. Like, I mean, that again, it's like it's the same way that I think a lot of people of our generation, leaving out other preferences, would probably prefer Celtic to Rangers because of Henrik Larsson,
Mhm.
like solely because of Henrik Larsson. I mean, I would also argue there are other things that tip me in that direction, but Henrik Larsson is the main thing, because Henrik Larsson, like so many other players, I was like, this is a guy who he has star quality, and that's the thing, you know. Like there are loads of players who are good. There are some players who are great, but there are very few who have true star quality, and Henrik Larsson was one of them.
See, it's funny you should mention because I was just thinking as you were saying that it's like I couldn't. Modern day football is obviously it's a level higher than where it was when we were growing up in the 90s and that. But
Hmm.
it's like I can't think of any apart from obviously the big two that everyone like Messi, Ronaldo that everyone mentions. Maybe
Yeah.
Lewandowski, right? But like, there's nobody in this modern era where I get really excited by. I think like
Hmm.
back in the day, I guess I sound like such an old man. But like you had world class players everywhere, and there seemed like an endless amount of them. It's like I think that's another reason why I've become kind of jaded with not jaded, a
Hmm.
bit kind of more cynical about football these days because it's like. But then obviously you're just growing up, you're quite impressionable. You see these guys, you're like, that's the guy. And then when you see
Hmm.
so many of them, you're like, well, I don't know who to pick. I'll just like all of them, I guess.
Yeah, I think some of it is like often those players, they have just this perfect moment where you don't know that much about them except what you see on the field. And so I think you still get those guys, but I think the turnover is faster. So like with Mbappe, we loved Mbappe. Mbappe was so exciting when he came on the scene. But when I say when he came on the scene, he was like 16.
Hmm.
And now we know about Mbappe's huge contract, and we know about him being kind of a dick for PSG, and all those things start to put you off them. So I'd say the turnover is faster now, like because there was a point, in the mid 2000s, you had Bale and then you had Neymar, and you were like, this is it. That was the kind of they were always touted as potential contenders for that Messi Ronaldo crown. And so you could get really invested in them for a season or two, but then after that, they fall off or they fall out of favor, or you just think they're a dick because you saw them dive in a Champions League game, and you have to kind of move on to the next person. So part of that is yeah, I think it's hard to kind of just truly identify with or adore a player in the way that you used to, because you just know a little bit too much. Like that's possibly the case. But that said, what you said there is also true, that I think football is a level higher, and that means it's less about just individuals producing magic. Like, that's obviously still an intrinsic part of the game, and the best teams have, the most magical players, blah blah blah. But there are teams who play way above their talent level. Like Arsenal, if Arsenal win the title this season, Arsenal have tons of good players, but they don't have a single player who's like the best in the world in their position. Um, we're now used to that as an idea, that teams can just play above, maybe not above their talent level, but teams play as a collective, and they play in a style determined by the manager rather than style determined by the best player on the side. So I think that's part of it too. Old football was a lot more like basketball is now, where there's one guy on the team and he is the difference maker and he runs that team. Well, if you want that now, you probably do watch basketball, because basketball is a more individual led, personality led game, and football is much more strategic and team based.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially, yeah, as you say, especially nowadays, it's a lot more team focused. Because I was watching just like random, just you get a moment, you just go back and watch like in your suggested videos, it's like goal of the season from 2009-10. I think it's like Maynard Figaro or Emerson Boyce or one of those lads for wings. Like, what the fuck is Emerson Boyce doing in the Premier League? Like, there's but like, fair enough, he's better than I ever will be. I'm in no position to take the piss out of Emerson Boyce. But it's like, there's no, it's everyone seems to be like so good now. It's like, it's just a bit, it's no crack anymore,
I mean, yeah, it's a different taste, isn't it?
But I'm being facetious, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it actually isn't, though, right? Like, sometimes you watch a Pep team play, an early Arteta team. I could imagine when City and Arsenal face off this season, it could be so boring. Like, there's no way of knowing, because they're two kind of possession ideologues who just want to play a particular way. And interestingly, that era, where Figueroa and Boyce would kind of score goals of the season, they were all just like 40-yard screamers. Yeah. And now you get coached out of all that shit. Coaches say, why are you coughing up possession 40 yards from goal? Like, play a normal pass like a normal person. Yeah, I don't know. It's very easy to complain about football, and I do it a lot. But I just think the way you engage with it changes, doesn't it, as you age? You stop. There's obviously that point in your past where you declare yourself Thierry Henry on the playground, and then at a certain point you think, I don't want to declare myself any one of these dickheads. Like, they're all earning more in a week than I'll earn in the next like several years. So it's hard to imagine yourself among them, I guess.
And it seems to be their squad number indicates the number of court cases they've been involved in the last few years.
Yeah, pretty much.
It's quite upsetting. Yeah. It's funny, like, that you mentioned, you talk about being Henry and stuff. Who was your kind of, on the playground, you're like, this is my guy. This is the guy who I'm going to be?
Ooh. I mean, I think it was Henry quite a bit. Also Freddie Ljungberg. I thought Freddie Ljungberg was really cool.
I love Freddie Ljungberg. I thought he was just
the best
guy in the world.
Yeah, he was the best, man.
It's like, and he got a mohawk. He looks amazing.
He looked amazing, and he got the piss taken out of him relentlessly. And there was like a massive homophobic kind of like witch hunt by the press, because they were like, this guy's posed in his underwear. He must be gay. Yeah. And Freddie Ljungberg, being Swedish, was just like, so what if I am? Shut the fuck up, leave me alone. It was great. But yeah, I'd say those were the main guys. Is there somebody else? Davids actually was one. Davids was one.
Speaking of cool.
Yeah. And also I was like more of a midfielder than I was a forward who was going to burst past a bunch of people. I could pass, and that was about it. So I was just like, yeah, a good Davids.
I'm completely the same.
Tallest man there.
I was like a bit midfielder because I was like, just give me the ball and I can give it away. So as long as I don't have any responsibilities,
Sure.
it's like one of those. It's like, make it look like I'm doing something. Like
Yeah,
you,
be
what's that
involved.
thing? Yeah, it's like at work where you walk around with a clipboard and a word expression, so no one asks you to do anything. That sort of equivalent.
Yeah.
Right, so just to step away from the football chat a second, you mentioned that you're a therapist as well, which is
Hmm.
I really admire that, by the way. Which is I would love to get involved. It's just I don't feel like I have the kind of. It's weird. I don't feel like I'm empathetic enough to people's plight. I'm quite a quite closed off sort of, so I
Hmm.
find it quite weird to kind of I can sit and listen, but I could not give any meaningful advice whatsoever. So,
Mm.
so just how did you get involved in the? It was always something that you wanted to do, or was it just something you figured with the past few years, people's mental health obviously took a decline. Did you feel that yourself and just think there's something I need to do? I need to do something about this, or I'd like to help people who are in a
Mm.
similar position.
Um, a bit of all of the above, really. Like, I mean, when I was graduating, I remember thinking I wouldn't go back and change the degree I did, but I wonder if maybe I would have also enjoyed to study psychology. Um, and it's kind of recurred, at various points during my 20s, I thought about it. Um, but in 2019, I was pretty depressed. I'd been seeing a therapist at that point for a couple of years, because I've always kind of had bouts of low mood, uh and I've also struggled with my anger for long periods of time. So I was like, right, okay, I kind of want to see a therapist about this. And so I'd been seeing her for a couple of years, and then I convinced work and convinced my wife and convinced her work that we should take a sabbatical. So we went to Paris for 2 months. We saved up. We went to Paris for 2 months. We went to French classes every weekday for 4 hours. And I wanted to do that as well because I was interested in language learning. I always have been, like, it was part of my degree. My wife had AS level French, and I was like, I'm going to tutor myself up so we could be in the same class. So I did that and really enjoyed it. And while I was there, the whole point was I'm going to think about what I'm going to do with my life, because also I was kind of like, whether I want to or not, I'm not going to be on YouTube at 45. Like, there's just not going to be a home for me. It's going to be taken by younger people. So even if I wanted to do it, that job is going away. Okay. So that's good, knowing that the obsolescence is on its way. You think, right, okay, I could plan for it. So I started thinking about what I wanted to do, and I wanted something that was portable, so we could potentially move one day, maybe get out of the UK, all that kind of stuff. And I came back to therapy. And so when we went home, I first did a course on teaching English as a foreign language, because I was like, you know what, regardless of what we do, I will be able to do that somewhere. And I thought it'd be interesting, as well. And I'd kind of been thinking about that too. And then after that, I did a 6 month night course, kind of as a taster, like a level 2 certificate, it's called, in counseling skills, just at like an adult education college in London, um, to confirm that I wanted to do it. And at that point, I was like, I definitely want to do this. So there was a window where applications were open to go and do, a postgraduate diploma, which could also become a master's. And I found one place. There was one place that was going to work for me, where like it was only take one day a week rather than like three, and like the money worked out and blah blah blah. And they did the right kind of counseling that I wanted to do. And so I just went for it. And then I started there in late 2020, and I graduated last year. And I've been practicing, as a therapist in the NHS in South London, since November of 2021. So quite a long time now. Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, part of it was that I think in my work for FD, I did feel a lack of connection to people. I was feeling kind of distant from people. And that thing we were talking about before, you know, of like, I've got to pretend this game matters, I've got to pretend this football story matters. That stuff was starting to grate on me. And I thought I want to do the opposite of that, something that matters as much as it possibly could. And so that was what I ran towards. And once I started doing it, it just really kind of clicked for me. And empathy, you know, you say what you say there. I think it's actually better to have that perspective than a lot of people who just think of themselves as naturally empathetic. Empathy is fucking hard. It's the hardest thing in therapy. You work at it all along, and there are therapists who've been doing it for 40 years who are like, everyday empathy is hard to do because sympathy is easy, but empathy is hard. Sympathy, just saying like, oh, I'm sorry about that. Here's my advice. Well, that's not really what you're trying to do in therapy, or at least in my conception of it. You're trying to understand how it feels for that person to be going through what they're going through, not in a fake way, you know, where you're like saying, oh, I know exactly how you feel when they're bereaved or something, but you're trying not to bring your presuppositions about the world or about life to it, and you're trying to say, what's it like for you? What's it like for you as a woman? What's it like for you as a black person? What's it like for you as a Muslim? Like, you know, whatever it might be. Those are like the obvious ones, but there's more below that. You know, what's it like for you in a marriage where you don't feel appreciated or whatever? All that stuff felt meaningful and felt, it's tough, it's heavy, but it's exciting, because it's like the real kind of business of living. And doing that work made me feel much less. It actually gave me meaning back in other parts of my life as well, because before I'd work all week and at the weekend I'd want to rest, but I'd get to the end of the weekend and I'd think, Jesus, what do I do with this weekend? I've wasted this whole week now because all I did was work, and then all I did the weekend was sit, and I've done nothing. Now I've got a baby. I spend my weekends with a baby, and in the week I see therapy clients, and at the end of the week I think, I actually know what I've done this week. I can tell you what I've done this week. I've spent this time with my daughter, and I've watched her learn a new word, and I've spent this time with a client, and at the very least showed them that what's going on for them matters to somebody other than them. That does have value. And so those things are all those things are, I guess in a way, though, that's all dancing around your question, which is fundamentally, I'm just nosy about people. I'm just interested. I kind of, I want to know what's going on under the surface with people. And that's really the thing that got me into it. You know, I can talk about all the high-minded stuff and wanting to help and blah, blah, blah. And I do want those things. But really, at the bottom of it, I just kind of want to know what's going on in people's lives. And that's where it starts. And then it goes from there. When I was going into it, I thought, I don't know whether I have anything to offer therapy. That's the one thing. Mm-hmm. You know, like, I don't know if I were looking for a therapist, I'm not sure that I'd want like a 33-year-old white guy. In fact, I know I personally did not. I wanted an older woman. I was like, I can't imagine having a man. I certainly want them to be older than me. Like, these were the things I was thinking about. And so that's the thing I think about still, you know, like, do I have something to offer here? But actually, the generation below us, I mean, you're younger than me, but the generation below us is really interested in kind of self-development and self-care, and probably need a little bit more guidance on that stuff than they get from social media. And also, there are a lot of men who like fucking need to go to therapy. like they need to go to therapy. And if they're willing to go to therapy with me, then good. Because I just want them to go to therapy with anyone, because I don't know what it was like for you, but I went to an all boys school, and my parents cared, but my parents were still, you know, a previous generation. And it was, if they thought about what they wanted for me in the future, they thought about security and success in that sense. They wanted me to have enough money, and they wanted me to, you know, succeed in all those obvious material safety related ways. Whereas now we think we want what's best for our friends and potentially our kids from an emotional point of view. We want them to live contented, satisfied, and ultimately happy, whatever that means, lives.
Yeah, to be honest, I think that's kind of, I'm really happy that the generation below us is thinking that sort of way. But then I think there's so many barriers, like, to get involved, especially within the NHS, which is a fucking it's a travesty that that's the way that it has to be, especially with this. I don't want to get too. Well, I don't mind
Yeah,
getting political. I'll just happily say fuck the Tories, man, because
yeah,
fuck
fair
the
enough.
Tories. Because there's clearly people that want to do it and they have a love and they have a passion for helping people.
Mm.
But I feel like they're being, through no fault of their own, there keeps being barriers put up constantly to prevent them from doing that, which is
Yeah,
would negatively affect everyone in the long term, no matter
yeah,
how much you're going to help people.
but it's nice that that political consciousness is there. You know, like there are people do. There is a kind of community hunger, right?
Mhm.
The same as there is in sport. Like there's this desperate desire to be part of something. Um, and it's nice that younger people are starting to act on that. And you know, all the people who vote Tory are dying, so like that's something to look forward to. And ultimately, you hope that all the right people, the nurses and the train drivers and everybody, will win, and the Tories will be, you know, like dumped in volcanoes or whatever. But it's in the meantime, you think, what can I do? And the option you have is to reach out to somebody close to you. And that might be somebody, you know, emotionally close to you, like a friend, or it might be somebody physically close to you, like somebody who lives near you, somebody who lives in the same part of London as you. In this case, it's somebody who lives in quite a vague part of London. You know, like we're in South London. That's it. We're not even in the same NHS trust. Like I work in Lambeth. I live in Wandsworth. But I wasn't born in the city. I've chosen to live in this city. I've chosen to make it my home. It's where my daughter was born. It's where my daughter will go to school and grow up. So I would like to try and play a minor part in making it a little bit better. In the same way that like I'll pick up litter when it's in my front garden, you know, like it's the same thing. Um Trying to like pick a little bit of litter out of somebody's day through therapy. It's not much because you know I get 6 sessions with clients, which is very little, but it's something, and it at least gives me a sense of meaning, which for a long time in my 20s I don't think I had. I was quite miserable in my 20s, I think.
So as well as your work with Football Daily and with the NHS, you're a very busy boy. You have your own podcast now, Unseen Incidents, which I have become slightly obsessed with recently. It's getting me through.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, man. It's like every time I go for like a walk, or like any excuse I have, like any hour free I have, I'll stick it on and listen to you and Pete put the world to rights and take the piss out of people who don't drive the speed limit or whatever it is.
Sure.
So it sounds like, so like, why did you want to do a podcast? But I assume it's because you wanted to do one. I assume just to kind
Well,
of.
I mean, it's quite a good question because like I talked about doing it for ages, and then I remember my wife said to me, she was just like, you should do this. And I was kind of getting the urge to write a bit. And I was like, you know what? I want to write because I write every day for Football Daily. You know, I'm writing 2,000 words a day of a script normally. And every career I've had has been about writing, but that's writing in a house style in a way that is kind of dictated by our needs and by our kind of, you know, corporate masters to some degree, which is fine, but like it's not writing for me. So I kind of thought I want to write a little bit, and I wrote a couple of articles. I was like, I'm just going to set up a Patreon tonight and write a couple of articles. And then it became apparent pretty much immediately that everyone was like, fuck these articles, just do a podcast. And I thought, okay, well, I can either do one or the other. I can't do both. I don't have enough time. And again, it was a similar thing as the therapy thing is in some ways, which was I used to do a podcast for Football Daily with Pete before he left. He was a traitor. And I thought I don't get to talk to him that much. So this way I can guarantee that I'll talk to him every 2 weeks. And so every 2 weeks, Pete and I, you know, will record together for 3 hours because we record 2 episodes back to back. We obviously talk in the meantime as well. And yeah, a lot of it's about the podcast. So it's not always kind of like just chat, but it means that every couple of weeks I do just talk to a friend. And I don't know what this is. Like, I'm sure this is a gross generalization, but I feel like men are not good at keeping up with friends. I'm terrible at it.
Oh
I'll
yeah.
I'll I'll go months without talking to some of my friends, and I think, why am I like this? I feel good every time I see them, but then when my wife arranges something, I'm like, oh Jesus, do I have to go somewhere? Oh, it's the last thing I want to do. But this, I get to talk to Pete, and we get to talk about football. Well, we talk about football really because we need a hook for the podcast, and we do have opinions that can't be offered in our day jobs. But mostly, it's just I would like to talk to Pete. And at this point, so it's kind of gone already through a few stages, having only been started in August. But at this point, that's the thing that I enjoy the most about it. I enjoy chatting with Pete. I laugh every time I talk to him. It's a really good time. So yeah, Unseen Incidents ended up being I guess like all podcasts, it ends up being about two white guys talking bullshit. Having started with very like lofty ambitions.
Where did the name come from, just as a matter of interest?
I just needed something, man. And I was like, I'm very impatient. So I was just like, I'm coming up with a name now. And it's like, and that's going to be the name. But I remember Arsene Wenger, whenever he was asked about something that was a little bit awkward to talk about, he would say, I didn't see the incident. And I thought, that's actually kind of how I feel about, like, I feel football is like that a lot, where football pretends not to see the things that it's uncomfortable talking about. So those are the things I want to talk about. So Unseen Incidents, that's what we're going to focus on here. So it did kind of come together, but to be honest with you, it was a pretty spur of the moment decision.
And is the album art, I guess, just the picture that you use for is that Arsene Wenger? Because it's doing my head in. It's like it looks like
it is Arsene Wenger.
Right, good. I'm not going mental. That's fine.
Yeah, I did an AI generation before it was cool. Of I think I just looked for like Renaissance art of like I can't remember what the prompt was I put in. It was like Arsene Wenger fighting the Taliban or something, or like, but it all ended up with like these weird like kind of tentacle arms. But that one, I looked at it and I was like, to me, this looks just like Arsene Wenger. I think it's just beautiful. Like, I thought it was shockingly beautiful when I saw it, because now like everybody's posting their fucking AIR on Instagram and Twitter, and so you see it all the time. But at this point, back in August, I know that's recent, but I was just like, I cannot believe what I'm seeing here. Like, this is like Renaissance art style, and so yeah, I went for it, and it makes me happy every time I see it, even though it is kind of weird, and even though now Arsene keeps saying dumb shit, it still pleases me.
How does Pete feel about it, being a Man United fan, having to look at Arsene Wenger every 2 weeks?
I'm just not interested in his opinion. I feel like that should be very clear from the nature of the show.
Typical English in regards to the Northern Irishman, where they just don't care.
Well, look, whoa, don't call me English now. Every time I meet Irish people or Scottish people, I feel obliged to say, just so you know, despite this accent, I'm not actually English. But yeah, pretty much whenever he speaks, I'm just like, shut up, fuck, like he's just there for hair reasons. He's not there for anything else. He's a diversity hire. He's a blonde.
I could absolutely do with him on this podcast if that's the case. So, Patrick, on your podcast, you like to end it with a section called the Burn Book, which I'm going to shamelessly rip off. But I'm going to, in regards to football. So, didn't even think of a classy name for it yet. So, Rosed. There we go.
That's good.
So, 3 things that you would like to kick out of football, no matter how petty or how inane they may be. Obviously, we're going to, the likes of your homophobia, all that sort of stuff. That should be a given. You shouldn't have to say that you want that out of football. So just in case anyone gets really angry that it's not mentioned, but it should be a given. So if you'd like to give me your first irritation about football.
This was hard, I've got to say. Like I wrote down a few, then I kind of went deeper into the weeds, and in the end, I gave up and I was like, I'm going back to the first 3 things I wrote down, just because otherwise this will go all day. So, number 1, And I'd like to think these are all deeper than they appear. But number one is whining about corners hitting the first man.
See, that is literally the first one I wrote down, is having a set piece taker that can't beat the first man.
No, no, no. My issue is with people whining about it.
Yeah, so it's the two different sides of the same coin here.
Yeah. Okay. 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 So you're my problem here. That's the issue.
You're my problem, technically.
Well, yeah, exactly. But okay. Should I explain? Is that the
Yeah, you explain your point, and I'll explain mine, and see if we can reach
okay?
some sort of mutual ground here.
Okay. So my issue with this is that I think it's lazy, this particular complaint.
Okay.
And I also think it makes less and less sense. So, on the one hand, I think it's part of a trend in football, which is people being unwilling to go against received wisdom. And people want to say something when they're watching the game, and people want to say something critical because that makes you sound like you know what you're talking about. But in this particular case, I don't see any reason why a corner that hits the first man is worse than a corner that just loops harmlessly over everyone or drops right in the middle and it's easy for the keeper to catch. I don't think those types of corners are worse, but they get less criticism than this particular type of corner. And I think because of my job, I get exposed to certain arguments again and again. And there are things you say that you don't think of as particularly controversial, but people go mad. So, a couple of years ago, I remember there was a huge fuss about John McGinn. Everyone was like, John McGinn, he's amazing. He's like a £50 million player. Maybe we'll go to Manchester United, all that stuff. And I was like, John McGinn, he's like, all right. Like he's fine. And I remember saying that at the time, and I'd make the argument and I'd kind of produce stats to back up what I was saying and blah, blah, blah. And the response I'd get would be like, nah, come on, he's quality. Like John McGinn, he's great. Everyone agrees he's great. And now I feel like everyone tells me how shit John McGinn is. And I don't think he's shit either. I think he's just all right. He's fine. I think he's got abilities that are useful. But at the time, what struck me was that I thought, I'm not convinced that you're saying this because you like really love John McGinn. These weren't like Villa fans I was talking to. They were just saying that John McGinn was good because they knew that was the consensus and they were scared of everyone saying like, oh, you're silly because you think it. And I still get this now with James Ward-Prowse. There are people who really love James Ward-Prowse and think he's good. But there are a lot of people who I think just don't want to criticize him because they'll get shit. And that annoys me a bit. And the same thing goes with corners. It's like, this is a criticism I can make that no one's going to call me out for. But I am going to call them out because I think the best kind of corner is a corner that just beats the first man. It's a corner that's whipped in with pace, really low and flat. It's incredibly dangerous. In-swingers, by the way, like statistically, lead to more goals than outswingers. So it's that corner that's whipped in low and flat, and a bunch of guys are running in and attacking it, and it's going through so fast that it could come off anyone and go in. And I think when you try and play those corners, quite often you're going to hit the first man, because you're trying to whip it just over his head. I think about Van Persie. The example I always give is Van Persie in that season at United 2012-13. Set pieces were unbelievable, but they all just missed the first man. And I reckon if we went back to that season, we'd see he did hit the first man quite a bit. So from that point of view, I think corners are actually a pretty low percentage opportunity. I think about 2 or 3% of corners result in goals. So if you try and play the best kind of corner and you fuck it up and they clear it, firstly, you'd hope your structure helps you win the ball back. But secondly, you haven't really given up that much. Whereas if you play that dream corner, you might create a huge chance. So I just think all the whining about it is just like out of proportion for how big a deal it is. And I don't think we hear it about lots of other things players do, like, pointless other kinds of corner or pointless switches across the field or any of that kind of stuff. Like, I don't think we hear it about that stuff in the same way. So that's my argument.
See, I think I'm now the epitome of this argument because I thought extremely narrowly about this point. I wrote it down and thought, yes, no one can argue with this. I am genius. So my main criticism is about especially corners, right? You're a designated set piece taker. This is your only job.
Yeah.
And you can't do it right.
I mean, I get that.
That was my main thing about it. It's like you have one thing to do and you fuck it constantly. And
Yeah.
but that it's a very linear argument. I haven't really thought about the bigger picture there.
No, but I get that as well, because like when you're a kid, like I think I broke my big toe of my right foot. I don't know. I never had it confirmed, so I still claim to have never broken a bone. But I think I broke the big toe of my right foot when I was a kid playing football barefoot. And so I was like, well, I'm not going to stop playing football. So I taught myself to play football left-footed. And so now I'm not good at football by any means. This is not like a claim I'm amazing at football, but I can play football with either foot identically. Like neither one is better than the other. Which actually, when you're playing five-a-side, you realize is like quite like makes life kind of easy because you can just receive on your left foot and you don't think about it. Well, to me, why are all footballers not capable of doing that? It took me a couple of months when I was a kid and I was shit at football. Why can a super talented footballer not improve their bad foot to that degree? So that's kind of my version of this. But I know what you mean. Like it is frustrating to see a corner hit the first man, and sometimes it hits the first man at like thigh height, and you think that's okay.
Pretty fur.
That's wild. But I'm just against hearing the same things all the time. I think that's it. You know, when we have to listen to pundits, and I'll come on to that.
Enough, so
I just, oh yeah, well, it feels like the thing that we all hate, right? What have you got up next? What have you got up next?
Since we're talking about pundits, I actually wrote down 4, and I've literally just wrote shite pundits, but I'll elaborate on shite pundits.
Agreed.
I genuinely think that punditry is one of the most unnecessary parts of modern football. For example, I was watching the Wolves Liverpool FA Cup replay the other day. Now, fair enough, right? You have the likes of you get someone in like Thierry Henry or Didier Drogba, right?
Yeah,
they have something meaningful to say. I don't give a shit what Danny Murphy has to say, you know, or like Robbie Savage. And this isn't, obviously, they've played the game at the Premier League level. Fair enough. I can't argue with that at all. But it's like, I think there's a difference between their level of input to say a Thierry Henry's level of input. And I just feel like, why aren't we getting more of that? Because like I'll happily listen. The way that they seem to do it is you're just telling me what I've just seen. I know what I've seen. I've watched it. Tell me why these things are happening, or tell me, what they've done wrong in this instance. Not just going, oh, he's kicked it and it's gone wide. Well done, Dan.
Or even the good players. You're like Alan Shearer will just say like, oh, for me that's a penalty, and you're like, well, it's a controversial decision. The fact that it's a penalty for you doesn't affect whether it's a penalty for me.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think it is a penalty. You think it is a penalty. Like, let's call the whole thing off. Where do we go from there? This is a big agree for me.
Yeah.
It's just dumb. But I would go. I want to offer a potential solution.
Okay.
Which is that I think we need term limits for pundits. Because I think a lot of pundits, they get a job as a pundit and then they stay as a pundit forever. And I don't think it should be like that. I think it should be like becoming president of the United States. It's right. You get a 4-year term, then you go up for re-election, and maybe you get another 4-year term, and then you're gone. That's it. And I think that would actually be good because, look, I can't shit talk pundits too much because of my job, but like, Graham Souness was an amazing player. Like, genuinely, I think it's kind of underrated by people, like what a great player he was. But he hasn't played football since the 80s.
That's the thing. The game has moved on so much since then. Why is he still talking about it?
And he still talk, and even Keane, Roy Keane played relatively recently, but the game is so different from the game Roy Keane played. And he was also an amazing player, but he talks about football in terms of intangibles all the time. It's all he talks about.
Oh, yeah.
All he talks about is desire and passion and blah, blah, blah. And you think, this doesn't actually tell me anything. I think part of it is not just that some of the pundits don't know anything. Most of the pundits are lazy. But I also think they're funneled towards stupid conversations. They're funneled towards discussion of incidents. Was it a penalty? Wasn't it? Was it a red card? Wasn't it? Or they're not called out on the things that are lazy points they just make off the top of their head. So, for instance, Alan Shearer says he should have done better there. Well, what I would like to see the presenter do is say, what would you do in that situation, Alan? or to say, well, Alan, come on, like you can't score every shot that you take. So what do you do to maximize, your ability? Because occasionally you get those moments. I've even heard them from like Michael Owen, where Michael Owen will talk about the movement he was coached in, or Thierry Henry will say, well, when I was in this position, this was my finish, or Rio Ferdinand will say, well, actually, in this position, what you should really be doing is watching for a guy behind you, all that kind of stuff. I think, oh, that's real insight from a real professional. I'm interested in that. But most of the time, it's just, oh, he's had him on toast there, or like, oh, he flatters to deceive, which I don't know what the fuck that means. And it's all that kind of stuff, oh, well, he's not that kind of player, so he's within his rights to go for that, that kind of thing. And I just think, man, we just need to turn these guys over, because it's unthinkable to me that there isn't somebody who stopped playing in the last 10 years who would be more intelligent and actually work harder at a job of being a pundit than these guys who've been firmly ensconced in these jobs for the best part of 2 decades. Because that's the other thing as well. When a player comes from Europe and they have no clue who he is, and you think, average fans on Twitter know who this guy is. They can tell you who he plays for, how many goals, assists he has, can tell you his XG, they can tell you like all that shit. But a guy who's paid hundreds of thousands of pounds to be a pundit can't even be bothered to do the basic research. I think that's so insulting. I'm so insulted by that. And basically, until they get rid of that, I just think they should have, all football matches should just be broadcast with like crowd noise and no punditry. That'd be by far the best thing to do.
I agree. I feel like it's kind of, let's just read from the big book of football cliches for 15 minutes because we have to fill 15 minutes.
Yeah. Or it's like, oh, well, we have to get a Liverpool fan on this Liverpool game. Well, you should get somebody who you think is going to offer something. I think when it's Jamie Carragher does tend to offer something, because Jamie Carragher, you can tell from the way he talks, he has gone away and tried to learn stuff about a game that he was amazing at, which takes such a degree of humility. Like that's such an amazing thing to have, especially when you're a middle-aged guy, whereas a lot of the other people are like, not only will I not learn another thing about the game, you can't force me to learn another thing about the game. I will never learn anything. And I just find that I don't just find it demoralizing. Like I say, I find it insulting, because the guys on Football Daily, for example, I see the effort. I think about the effort I've made, but I see the effort a lot of them make now to improve their football knowledge. They work so hard to do it. And when they present something, they have really thought about it. And I just think that is like the courtesy you do the listener, the courtesy you do the reader, to really put time in to speak from a place of I guess of thoughtfulness, and from a well-informed perspective, and to give your honest opinion. That's all I want. And I'm fucking bored of people being like, oh, well, he's not that kind of guy, or just like, well, I think the problem today was a lack of desire. Like, we see teams with like no desire beat teams that are shit all the time. Like, do we really think that, like, I don't know, every team that City has beaten in the last 5 years, they had more desire than that team in that game? Do they fuck? Otherwise, in the FA Cup, the smaller team would always go through.
Oh, yeah.
But they don't, so come on.
So that's one thing I think, that, not to blow smoke up your arse, but I'm about to. Like you guys at Football Daily, you can tell that you do that you work and you do the research and you put the time in. I think that's what people appreciate. Well, because I think that's what the modern football fan wants. They want to be informed, and they want to have, that kind of discussion, especially now with like the amount of, there's no reason not to be able to look at the amount of resources that are available nowadays to look this sort of shit up. It's not, a 10-minute Google search and you're.
Yeah, well, like the football conversation used to happen on Match of the Day. Like people used to watch Match of the Day and then go into the office or go into school and talk about what had been talked about on Match of the Day. Now it happens on Twitter. And on YouTube and other forms of social media, and people just know so much. People have watched so much. Like there's so much niche expertise to be had, which is great. And I understand why it's scary for people who feel like it's gonna, that's like the meteor that's gonna kill them, like the dinosaurs. But like, I don't know. I just think they could stand to be a little bit more humble.
Especially if I was making that amount of money a year. Fucking hell.
Exactly, exactly.
So we'll move on to your third and final, because I'm aware we've rambled on for a good long while. What is your final one?
Umbrella prejudice.
Right? Uh, could you elaborate for us idiots who don't know that?
If you're a manager on the touchline and it's raining,
Oh,
you're
right. Yes, I see.
you can't carry an umbrella.
I thought
And
this was some
everybody,
like I thought this was some big collective term that I wasn't aware of, but it's
no,
actually about just the prejudice.
absolutely not. No, there's zero political intelligence to this. It's if you're on the sideline as a manager and it's raining, you're not allowed to carry an umbrella. If you do, you're like soft or wet. And I guess it's because that whole Steve McLaren
It's
in the UK anyway. It's
oh
probably
yeah.
because of Steve McLaren and the whole Wally with the Brody thing. But when I see a manager who's just been standing on the sideline for 90 minutes and he's wet through, I don't see a tough guy. I see an idiot. I think that's so silly. Like why are you doing that? Just carry an umbrella. And I think if I were a manager, I wouldn't wear a suit because football's not a formal occasion. I wouldn't wear a tracksuit either because I'm a normal man. I just wear normal
Yeah,
clothes.
you're a grown
Uh,
man, you have
exactly.
a
I'm an
child.
adult. Yeah, I'm not in Sports Direct. I'm a normal person. And I'd carry an umbrella if it was raining because I don't want to get rained on. And actually, you shouldn't want to because for the duration of human history, getting rained on for 90 minutes was a legit hazard to your health.
Yeah. And
There's
it's
a whole
just
sorry, go.
blatantly unpleasant.
Yeah. And then you just see them and like water's dripping off their face, and especially when they're wearing a suit.
Mm.
When you're wearing a suit and like you're drenched, you look like such a tool. You're like, so you've made an effort to wear this nice suit. Well, not a nice suit, let's be honest, because they're football managers. But like you've made an effort to wear this nice suit, and now you're
Pop
just
shop's
wet
finest.
through. Yeah, exactly. You're like, so you've got your shiny suit on,
And
and now
brown
it's
shoes.
oh yeah, with brown shoes, and it's very very wet. Like I don't understand why you'd do it. It just seems silly to me, and I think, look, this is the downside of all these managers need to go and read a Jane Austen novel, you know, because they'd see that in those somebody gets rained on, and for the next 100 pages, everyone's wondering if they're going to die. Like that's what they need to go and read, and then they won't stand in the rain for 90 minutes anymore. I would not do it personally, but anyway, umbrellas, bring them back into football.
My one is that my last. I have two left one, and they're definitely not as good as that. So I'll just rattle through the two of mine. The first one is people who define themselves by their football club. I find this very annoying. I find this
Sure.
extremely irritating, especially as a Newcastle fan who's just I would define myself by misery over the last 20 years. I just think it's bizarre. It's like you're a human person with experiences and thoughts and feelings, but this is what you've chosen to define yourself by. It's fine. I mean, we all, nothing wrong with loving your club. That's the whole point of it. But Jesus, chill out.
Yeah. And we all agree that people who are like really weirdly proud that they have an Android phone instead of an iPhone, we all agree those people are kind of annoying. Yeah, there's a difference between having it and boasting about it, where people are like, actually, my Android can do it. It's like, I don't care. We all agree those people are weird, but it's exactly the same thing, right? It's like, I personally choose to identify with this corporation, which at
Oh
this
yeah,
point is what they all are, right?
which does not give a shit about me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like it was here
It's
long before me, it will be here long after me. It does not give a scuppering fuck.
Yeah, and then people getting into fights about it. You're like, well,
That's what it's like. You're a grown man and you're arguing about the result of fucking Preston versus Gillingham. Is this what we
yeah, I
want to
mean,
define ourselves by? Are we taking the piss?
well, Gillingham, I mean, yeah, having been present for a lot of fights outside Gillingham matches, um, yeah, not a lot of fun. But then again, the football wasn't that fun either. So it was just, you got your kicks where you could. So you've got one
Literally.
more. You've got one more. I can't believe you let me have three and you have four. This is
Well,
outrageous.
it's literally because I just thought of the shite punditry thing whilst watching that game, so I thought I need to add this in.
Sure.
But the last one is it's no fun. It's gambling sponsorships in football. I
Yeah,
fucking
sucks.
hate it. I absolutely hate it. It's like it's
Sucks.
just perpetuating a horrible cycle of people who in a lot of times can't. I don't want to sound insulting, but a lot of times
Mm.
you can't get into that spiral. You can't help yourself, and it just keeps perpetuating. It's like, oh, go on, it'll make you feel better. Put another bet on, you'll feel really good after that.
Mm.
And then the whole advertising campaign for it is like, was it when the fun stops, stop? But the biggest word in that slogan is the word fun. So it's like, you're not really helping, are you? It just I don't know, it just takes the piss a little bit. I just don't like it. Plus, they ruin shirts for the most part.
That's true.
I like
yeah, it's true, isn't it? Because I guess if you were like, if you're a gambling addict, every game you watch, you're just going to be reminded of gambling. It's like, if you're a cocaine addict, you don't see like players don't run around with like little baggies of cocaine taped to their chest, so at least you can forget about it for 90 minutes. Whereas if you're into gambling, but maybe then the football is the trigger itself. But yeah, I completely agree. It just feels like dirty money generally is just all the money in football is dirty at this point, you know.
It's
like,
what's that old expression?
There's
No such thing as a good billionaire, is there?
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know. I completely agree with this one, but I sort of start to despair of any sort of advances being made.
Oh God, it's not going to happen ever, is it? Let's go back to the days of, I don't know, the local garage sponsoring people and all that.
Newcastle Brown Ale.
Hell yes. As a non-drinker, that resonated with me greatly.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean,
it looked class on the shirt though. Like, it looked very nice, and it was good. You know, it was a local.
And it was local.
Yeah,
it was local.
Company.
Yeah, it's a genuine Newcastle icon.
Yeah, like you know, and that's the the era where we're kind of we look back on most fondly. You think of that shirt and you think of like, yeah, we were actually good once upon a time.
Solano.
Oh, what a boy.
Babayaro.
Like, Lauren Robert banging them in and then having a cry because he played for Toronto, who are my second team, and he had a whole shit show for them because he's embarrassing.
He played for Toronto?
Yeah, he went to Toronto in like 2007, played 2 games and then pissed off.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, that's the same reason why I hate Jermaine Defoe.
Oh, I've always hated Jermaine Defoe.
Isn't he? It's just something about him, isn't it? Well, that and he played for Sunderland and he scored that banger against us in the derby, and then he went to Toronto and then just decided he couldn't be arsed. So just collected designated player wages and then just pissed off back to England again.
Awful, man.
Truly dreadful. Which seems like Jermaine Defoe.
What a note to end on.
Yeah, it seems the perfect place to end this podcast on. Patrick, thank you so much for coming on and giving me more of your time than you really should have.
Oh no, well, thank you very much for having me. It's been really fun. I mean, obviously, I will always take a couple of hours out of my day to talk about myself. So thanks for giving me the opportunity, because at this point, my daughter makes clear every day, except for when I'm doing extremely stupid things, I'm not that interesting. So it's nice to feel like I am for a few minutes. So thank you.
Not a problem, man. Anytime. Obviously, people know where to find you. Football Daily, Your Football Daily, Unseen Incidents podcast. Is there anything else you'd like to plug?
No, I think that'll basically do it. Yeah, I'm Patrick BVS on Twitter and Instagram, but that's pretty much it. Unseen Incidents podcast. Search for us on your favorite podcast app.
And get on the Patreon.
Yeah, get on the Patreon, please.
Because the exclusive stuff on there is mental. If you want to hear it, that's perfect, man. Thank you so much, man. Appreciate it.
Cheers, man.